These are the best and worst superhero movies of the decade so far. Fifth worst of the decade so far is Eternals, which is actually my least favorite MCU movie, but luckily for the MCU, there's more superhero films out there, but I think this is just incredibly dragged out, boring, overstuffed with way too many uninteresting characters. I really think Eternals could have turned out amazing as a TV show if we had like 10 episodes that were an hour long each to really just explore all these different characters and then see them come together. It would work so much better. But I'm sorry, I just cannot get invested in anything that's happening in this movie because I don't care about the characters. Fifth best, another MCU movie, Spider-Man No Way Home, but don't worry, we move on from the MCU pretty quickly in this list, but I do really love this movie, and I think it really elevates past just being a nostalgia fest. All the new Spider-Man coming back really adds to the story. Plus, Willem Dafoe gives us one of the best MCU villain performances as the Green Goblin. He's still amazing as a character, and this is just an absolute blast of a movie after like the first 45 minutes. Fourth worst is Morbius. I honestly can't wrap my head around how this movie ever got made. Like, why would a D-list Spider-Man villain be who they picked to make a solo film about? They were just trying to cash in on Spider-Man hype, and they quickly realized, hey, nobody actually cares about Morbius without Spider-Man there. Writing is just lazy. There's literally a line where Morbius himself is like cooking up some concoction, and he says this is fatal to bats but deadly to humans. Like, hey, genius, that means the same thing. Matt Smith is an incredible actor who tries to bring literally anything to the script he was given, and he really can't, which is really impressive to make Matt Smith not look like a good actor, but at least he gave us this iconic and hilarious dancing scene. Fourth best, I have The Suicide Squad, talking about the 2021 version from James Gunn. This movie is funny, it has heart. I think all these characters are portrayed super well. James Gunn is really great on working with these like ensemble casts and making sure you care about every character or making sure they all have something to do in the film, and it's kind of why I'm really excited for his version of Superman. I think Superman works best when he can really elevate the characters around him, and I think James Gunn's going to do an amazing job at this based on this and the Guardians movies. It's fun to look at, like the cinematography is creative, the visuals are just colorful, the action is fun, and that's what I really want from comic book movies a lot of the time, and that's exactly what this gives me. Third worst is Madam Web. I know it's easy to say this is the worst superhero movie like of all time. I simply don't think that's true because I honestly had some fun with this movie just because of how dumb it was. I was laughing, and I'm sorry, if I have a good time with a movie no matter how bad it is, it can't be the worst ever. Second, there are actually good things in this film. Like, I think the cinematography is actually okay. If you just look at stills from this film, it's actually shot really well. It's really when characters just start talking that things really start going downhill fast because the dialogue is so bad in this movie. A lot of it is also because of the editing. It's so awkward and choppy. As I've said before, this is barely even a superhero movie. She only looks into the future for 5 seconds. That's pretty much the only power, and all the other Spider-Women, which is like what got most of the people to go see this movie, are only seen in a vision of the future, which is honestly criminal and false advertising. Third best, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. James Gunn back on this list again, and you know what I think about this movie. I think it's funny. I think the emotional beats hit. I've talked about it a million times, so I don't want to go super into detail. I do want to talk about something a little different than I have before, and I think it's so impressive how James Gunn handled what happened to his characters in the Avengers movies that were out of his control in this film. Like, he had no control over Gamora dying and then a past version of her coming back, and yet he makes it such a great emotional core of this movie that has a satisfying but yet not cliche ending. And speaking of that, I love how he ends all the Guardians story. It's open for continuation, but also I'm satisfied if we never see these characters again, even though I really want to. Second worst is Black Adam. Listen, The Rock is not the greatest actor on earth, but what he does have is charm and personality. He's just a likable dude, I'm sorry. But this movie, some reason, cast Dwayne The Rock Johnson and then completely strips any personality out of this role. It is one of the most dull and boring lead superhero or anti-hero characters I've ever seen in my life. You know he's gonna win every fight. It's so incredibly dull. Dr. Fate is essentially the only redeemable part of this movie. I think the CGI looks terrible. It looks like a bad video game cutscene, especially during some of the final fights in this, and it is just a terrible film. Second best of the decade is The Batman. I can glaze this movie for forever. I think it's one of the best visually looking superhero movies of all time. Shout out to the cinematographer Greg Fraser. He also did Dune Part 2. I just love his entire style, and it fits this kind of movie so perfectly. Robert Pattinson is just perfect as this character. He blends in with Matt Reeves' style perfectly, and I love how they bring in that detective side of Batman. That's something we really miss from him in the movies, and I'm so glad they highlighted it. The Riddler was amazing in this movie, 3 million times better than the Jim Carrey version, even though I do find that version to be very funny. Even though this is a movie that I feel like goes on a little bit too long, everything with the city flooding at the end, I'm like, oh, wait, this movie's still going? All that is still actually really good and pulls me in every time, and I never mind the runtime by the time I'm at the finish of the film. My worst of the decade so far is Wonder Woman 1984. I don't know how this movie downgraded so much from the first Wonder Woman that I think was actually a pretty decent to actually good film. This one completely lost all the sauce that movie had. It's a complete mess, almost unwatchable. Gal Gadot is so terrible. This movie honestly personally offends me how bad it was when I watched this thing in theaters. We know your favorite and least favorite of the decade so far, but my favorite is easily still Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Some of the best looking looking animation I've ever seen. The story between Miles and Gwen is so good. Spider-Man 2099, an amazing antagonist. You get the Spot in this. An amazing original soundtrack I still listen to this day, and one of the best cliffhangers I've ever seen. It's absolute peak. If you disagree, I don't know, take it to a publisher. I don't want to hear it.